and, and starting right now, and we'll be posting the recording on the website of the Climate Action Office. Second thing is, my name's David Plum, and it's nice to be with you today. My role here is to facilitate, moderate today's conversation. You may have seen me in a Zoom screen some other day, facilitating the Vermont Climate Council and some of the public engagement we've done around Vermont's climate action and climate action planning. Let me share an agenda for today. We are going to spend about an hour and 15 minutes together. Today, 75 minutes is what we're aiming for. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Vermont's updated climate action plan, what it is, how it was updated, and some of the priority actions that are inside of it. And we're going to create a lot of time for clarifying questions from you or some initial discussion. Then we're going to have a discussion about what's most compelling. We'll be using a little Menti tool, like a little online polling tool that'll be fun, that we can type in some things and then have some discussion. And then we've got a panel lined up with climate counselors and also the Climate Action Office in Vermont to talk a little bit about from planning to action, sort of like now what? Now what do we do that we have an updated plan? And we'll have more discussion with all of you at the back end of that. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. Today we had one request for interpretation, which is we have American Sign Language. And so I'll try to remember as well to speak in a paused way to help with that. And so we really appreciate our interpreters here with us today. Okay, I'm going to do an initial set of slides about the climate action plan and how it came about. And then I'm going to be asking climate counselors who are here with us today to talk a little bit about those priority actions. And that'll get us to our first sort of back and forth where we can have some discussion amongst all of us. And I really want to thank everybody from coming in. And I appreciate folks dropping where they're calling in from in the chat. That's a nice thing to do. Shows the variety of where folks are coming from today on the Zoom. Okay, so let's dive in. And like I said, we're going to be here for about 75 minutes. And we really do want to make a good amount of time for back and forth with all of you as much as we can do in this virtual setting. All right, here we go. Why do we plan? Why do we do these things around climate and climate action? Well, one of the reasons is here on this slide. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. And that is, as you all know, Vermont experiences the impacts of a changing climate,
Absolutely.
particularly around around extreme weather events, flooding, and the like. Vermont disproportionately feels that in the US. And you can see that it is seventh in the number of federally declared disasters. And you can see a bunch of counties there in green on the right are, among the most impacted counties in the country. This requires Vermont to think about how to be more prepared, right? It requires Vermont to think about how it wants to be part of the solution of reducing the impacts of a changing climate on our planet. That's one of the reasons. There's other reasons too. You might hear from counselors about reducing the costs of volatile fossil fuels and the like, and we can get into that later. Okay, so here we go. Vermont's Climate Action Plan. Many of you, maybe not all of you, many of you may be veterans in this conversation, right? That back in 2020, the legislature created something called the Global Warming Solutions Act. It established the council. It asked the council or required the council to create a plan. It did that in December 2021, and it has to update it every 4 years. The council finished that update in July last year. And we did a lot of Zoom calls around that. We'll talk about that in a second. But that's the basic. And you'll hear the acronym throughout today's conversation of CAP, which is the Climate Action Plan, which is the product of what the council did and just updated. Okay, so this is a requirement from state law, from the state legislature. What's in the cap? This is the most basic overview. It's a series of recommended measures or steps or actions on the key elements of addressing climate in Vermont. One is about how do we reduce that climate causing pollution. We'll hear the technical terminology of mitigation or cross-sector mitigation. That's a big part of the cap is how do we pollute less? How do we emit less carbon and other greenhouse gases? And that's focused particularly around transportation, building, and the electric sector. Then there's a whole set of measures around agriculture and land and ecosystems, right? How is our land more prepared for these kinds of events? How is the land helping us be resilient in these events? And how do we reduce carbon uh, being emitted from our land? So we talk a lot about nature-based solutions and the funding and investment needed. Then rural resilience and adaptation. That's a little bit more about the built infrastructure in our communities, the bridges and culverts and all that stuff. Um, but this year in particular, or this update in particular, there's more emphasis on public health, which wasn't in the first one. And so that's an important upgrade and update to the plan and how we support our communities to be prepared for a changing climate. And then that final piece there about cross-cutting pieces, there we talk about education, talk about workforce, who's going to be doing this work of weatherizing homes and other things like that. And we talk about funding and financing. And I'm using kind of a very royal we here, everybody who's been involved in this process, whether it's the council and other groups. Speaking about who's been involved, the Vermont Climate Council was created by the legislature, and it has 5 subcommittees where a lot of the work gets done. And so the rural resilience, the ag and eco, the cross-sector mitigation, which is the one about transportation and buildings and electricity. And then it also has these other two, the just transitions, which is about how are Vermonters being treated fairly in this transition. And science and data is about bringing the best available information to the table when making these kinds of decisions and plans. Okay, so this is how the work got done. Um, and let me say a few more things, and then I'm going to turn it over to counselors to talk about priorities. There was a really big effort to go out and talk to Vermonters over the past year and a half, 2 years of this update. It happened a lot of different ways. When there was a draft plan, there was a whole bunch of in-person meetings, a bunch of virtual public meetings, and a team of folks in collaboration with the Climate Action Office has been going around the state, attending events, tabling events, talking to a real range of Vermonters about this, partnering with community-based organizations to reach people who don't typically get involved in these kinds of planning processes. And all of the meetings of the Climate Council and its subcommittees were public, so people could listen in. Um, and there were opportunities for public comment during those, albeit relatively brief. But there was this whole effort to get out and really listen. And when doing that, some very clear messages came out. And they're listed on this slide, some of the ones that were most obvious in when you go out and do that level of engagement and go across, like from north to south in the state. What are some of those messages that came out? Well, one of them was you got too many things here, folks. You need to prioritize. You need to focus, right? So that the state can make progress on at least some things. And so what did the council do? They took that input and they said, all right, let's prioritize. And the council made a top 10 list and a top 52 list. That was a change based on public input, and that was really helpful. And you can see for each of these bullet points, there was an action from the council to do something about it, right? Whether it's about costs, about funding, about specific topics that somehow fell through the cracks, um, and the issue around language accessibility. So in each of these, the council took that input and said, all right, we can do something about this, and made some decisions. Okay. All right. So now what we want to do before I open it up and we have a quick conversation um, is I want to turn it over to some of the counselors to walk us through this top 10 list of priority actions. And I will say two things. One is they're not in any order in terms of the most highest priority. It's just a top 10. And secondly, there's something like 200 actions in the updated climate action plan, all of which are relevant and important. There was an effort to just name what do we need to really, really get done now. And that's what this top 10 list is all about. Okay, here we go. I think Kelly Klein is going to kick us off here. And Kelly, introduce yourself and thanks for helping us explain some of these actions.
All right, thanks so much, David. Glad to be here. I'm Kelly Klein. I am the representative for the small business community on the Climate Council, and I've been working on this since the very beginning of when we started our first draft of the Climate Action Plan in 2020. So it's been really an honor to get to do this. Also coming in from Franklin County, Vermont, St. Albans. So I saw some other folks. Shout out to you from our county. Uh, so these, as David said, are not in order. The couple I'm going to cover are around a bit of a theme. We have expanding and maintaining our permanent flood resilient communities fund. And this is really important because, as people know, around our state, we've had a lot of issues with some severe flooding that's caused problems for our homes, our businesses, and we want to make sure that there is funding to help us be more resilient to prevent damage in future floods and also recover from any that may come our way. And we can't be just relying on federal dollars for this. We need to be thinking about what we can do here in Vermont with the resources we have. And then the next one here is investing in infrastructure for compact development. And compact development is something that actually it helps us with a couple different things. One, more compact communities mean people are going to be hopefully driving less. They're driving fewer miles, or maybe they can actually walk to where they're going or bike more easily. So that helps with the climate pollution reduction. But it also helps us with some of this planning around being more resilient. If we're building new homes and businesses and things, let's build them away from flood zones, but not have this sprawl that takes over the whole landscape and cuts into our ability to have farms and forests and things that help us with also sequestering and mitigating climate pollution. So that one is a really important one. And part of the reason it rose to the top is because it hits a couple different areas of our goals. So if we want to move to the next slide. So then, speaking of farms and forests, we want to make sure that we increase funding for programs that achieve climate goals on farms and forests. And the thing about our natural and working lands is there's a great opportunity there if a farm is managed well or a forest is managed well to help reduce that climate pollution, help sequester and maintain carbon in our lands, and also provide for our community, our infrastructure, or sorry, our local economy, right? These are places that are helping feed our families and support a vibrant and resilient Vermont. And also it can help with good soil management and good land management to help avoid things like some of the problems that come from severe rain events that cause flooding, erosion, washing away our topsoil and washing that carbon out to where it can then end up in the air. So there's a whole lot of things in this one as well that hit a lot of our goals. And then promoting equitable landscape connectivity and conservation. Again, that's helping with sequestering carbon, helping with avoiding problems with erosion, and helping make sure that we have good wetlands to help with the floods and keep them from rushing down our main streets and things like that. So that one, as I said, these four I think tie together really nicely, these top four, and they all hit a couple different main goals of this climate action plan and help in multiple different ways.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think Joanna Miller is up next to help us with some of these additional priority actions.
Thanks so much, David. Yeah, glad to be here with you today. Good to see so many people showing up. Very much appreciate that. Johanna Miller, I was the appointed environmental rep on the Climate Council. So yeah, happy to talk through a few other priority recommendations. The council recognize the fact that weatherizing homes offers tremendous benefits, cutting energy use and costs, making houses more comfortable and providing public health benefits, making more efficient use of energy technologies like heat pumps. And Vermonters also love weatherization and the robust public comment and engagement that David just described. We heard time and again that weatherizing homes must be a priority, and we agreed. So we recommended prioritizing weatherization and prioritizing that important work for low and moderate income Vermonters in particular to help those households reduce their energy burdens, reduce costs, their energy consumption. So it is a key priority. But funding remains a challenge. You very well may be aware that we receive significant one-time federal funds that help get more homes weatherized, among other things. But those funds are drying up. And, we're going to potentially face a significant funding cliff, which is the exact opposite direction from where we need to go. So long-term sustainable funding is really key to making this weatherization recommendation a reality, which is why another priority recommendation, taking preparatory steps and joining a cap and invest program when viable, was also a priority recommendation for the Climate Council. Unlike the electric sector, where we've required our electric utilities to help Vermonters reduce fossil fuel consumption and procure or develop more renewable resources. We've done a lot of important work, still more to do in the electric sector, but we have very few tools in the toolbox to reduce energy consumption and help Vermonters access cleaner, less costly heating and transportation solutions in particular. So that's why the council has supported taking steps to explore potential participation in a program, and starting first with looking at establishing a greenhouse gas reporting program. You can't manage what you don't measure, so it's really important to essentially establish a reporting program for the heating and transportation sector in particular so that we know how much fossil fuels we're using, and we can begin to manage that. So people are going to ask, what is Cap and Invest? Just very briefly, it's a program that sets a limit, a cap on total pollution and requires polluters to buy permits called allowances for those emissions. And then the revenue raised from those allowance purchases can then be reinvested into programs, incentives to low and moderate income Vermonters in particular to help purchase cleaner energy technologies like heat pump water heaters, heat pumps, electric vehicles or bicycles, public transit, etc. It was really important for the council too, if and when Vermont does move down this road, to ensure that any potential program provides direct benefits to and potentially direct payments to Vermonters to offset any potential cost increase that could be passed on from such a program. So it was a priority recommendation to set the stage for exploring the Cap and Invest program, starting first with establishing a greenhouse gas emissions reporting program, which the Agency of Natural Resources has done some work on, and the legislature very well may look into and take up this session. Next slide, please, David. A couple of other priorities in this space, supporting utility programs to ensure the electric grid supports customer electrification and resilience. We recognize that there are many cost-saving, pollution-reducing, and resilience supporting benefits moving towards greater electrification to meet Vermonters' energy needs for transportation, heating and thermal, and so much more. So we recommended a suite of strategies that will be important to ensure we have a strong, reliable, and resilient grid. And that includes things like supporting grid hardening and optimization through advanced metering and storage, strategic siting of generation, rate design, strategic rate design, distributed energy resource management, et cetera, to help maximize the efficacy of the grid and our distributed resources. And then, yes, along similar lines, the council also recognized that new electric technologies are more efficient, less polluting, and over time, often less expensive than their fossil fuel counterparts, which is why, again, we really recommend leaning into electrification as a top priority. So that means, again, a core focus on accelerating the use of electrification, such as electric vehicles, electric heat pumps in particular, to begin to phase out fossil fuel um, technologies. And for the transportation sector, the last thing I would say is that one important program that the council recognized as key to doing this in the transportation sector was to continue our state's long-term commitment to the Advanced Clean Cars program, which has obligated vehicle manufacturers to deliver more efficient and electric vehicles over time. Unfortunately, this program is a little bit in flux and in jeopardy with the Trump administration taking aim at it. But the council recognized that we need to continue to do our part to push, to participate and push for the um, ongoing implementation of this program. So that's four other big important priorities, and I'm going to turn it over to David Mears for the last two.
Thanks, Joey. I'm David Mears. I served on the Climate Council this last couple of years, and I currently work at a law firm in Montpelier and have had experience in the environmental nonprofit community and in state government. And I'll flag these two priority actions, which I think would be helpful to give a little bit of context for them. One, it's probably obvious that when you have 200 some recommendations to enhance the role of local governments to increase the capacity of citizens to engage in all this important work, that it's going to take money. And it might be perceived as tone deaf if that recommendation were made in this moment. As Joey said, there's a lot of pressures on state government to provide funding. I see Senator Perchlik is on the call, and it would be, I think, magical thinking to imagine we'd come up with all the funding all at once. But we did feel strongly as a council that we needed some interim funding immediately. And that programs, for instance, I'll pick on weatherization as one that just rises to the absolute top of the list of priorities as something that we can and should fund immediately. We don't have to wait until we have a long-term cap and invest program and long-term funding to move forward. And we really can't wait. There's too much progress that we've made, too much momentum in an area like weatherization to back off. And the more funding we provide to stabilize these priority actions, the better. And the other piece of the recommendation was recognizing that this moment in the 2026 economy is hitting folks that are at the lower income brackets the hardest, and that we absolutely need to find ways to find sources of funding that either at a minimum don't make their lives worse, but if ideally address the inequities that would otherwise occur to them. But something like weatherization is an investment that helps all around. Another last point on the revenue funding was that as we look at sources, it's just critical that we not fund climate work by burdening some of the economic sectors that are most important to the climate solutions, for instance, renewable energy or the use of electric vehicles or the sale of heat pumps, for example. The other issue that I'll turn to, and this is the very last bullet, was there was a recognition in terms of priority actions that there's an opportunity at a moment where Vermont is trying to attract young professionals to the state to enhance our economy, at a moment where we don't have enough people to implement all of the recommendations, whether it's heat pump installers or pick your favorite climate initiative. We have struggling forest and farm economies. We need more people to do this work, and we need to invest more directly in the kind of apprenticeships, mentoring, service learning programs that already exist that can be enhanced and focused on climate-related work. And that's a key opportunity. When you think about the Venn diagram of where we might all agree, I hope that all of us and all of at least the majority of folks at the General Assembly can agree that investing in a climate workforce has multiple payoffs that's worth investing in. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, David.
Super. Thanks, David. And thanks, Kelly and Joey as well for laying those out. Okay, so those are the top 10. And as we mentioned, it's among, you know, over a couple hundred actions, but these are ones that the council wanted to shout out loudly. Vermont, let's do this, right? Um, so we have an initial block of time here for some clarifying questions from you all. I do notice there's 138 of us on this Zoom call right now, and Vermont being the, polite place that it is, we're in one happy Zoom room, and thank you all for being good on your Zoom etiquette. Let me just say a few things as we get into this sort of discussion part. With so many of us, please be brief, share the floor, make space for others. We can have different views on this. These are tough issues, and it's okay to disagree. Just show respect in the same way you'd want people to respect you. And then let's try to stay on topic about climate action planning and what we're doing here. So with that, I'd encourage folks, if you have a question for counselors or for the overall process, or if you have something you want to share, I've been noticing quite a bit in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand. It's usually at that bottom bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If it doesn't say hand raise, it'll say, what does it say, Charlotte? Something.
Reactions.
Yes. Reactions. Yes. Thanks. Just like how Steve and Betsy were doing it. I'm just going to do 10 minutes of this, folks, and then we're going to do an exercise and go into a panel. But for 10 minutes, let's see how it goes. Stephen, over to you first.
All right, thank you. I'll be quick. Really appreciate this effort. I just want to put a plug in for biomass-based diesel. I'm a little disappointed that there was not that some type of low carbon fuel standard that would address the transportation sector, particularly the diesel side of the transportation sector, were included in the top 10 list because, quite frankly, it's low-hanging fruit. When you look at the LCFS in California now, it is harder to buy fossil transportation fuel, diesel fuel, than it is non-fossil. Almost 80%, and that's a lot of gallons, of the diesel pool and that's transportation and off-road, is now biomass-based diesel. And states around us, around Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, are all looking at low carbon fuel standards. It doesn't necessarily have to be a low carbon fuel standard, but some type of incentive to try to squeeze the carbon out of diesel fuel on the on and off-road sectors. And I hope some more attention is given to that. Thank you.
I appreciate you saying that, Stephen. Thanks so much. Let's take a couple hands and then maybe counselors, if there's things you want to react to you're hearing. Betsy Taylor, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for the whole presentation. It's really helpful. Excuse me. Um, but there were a couple of recommendations that talked about money. How do we find the funding for programs to achieve the climate goals? How do we do that equitably? And I'm just curious if any one of the counselors could speak to the ideas that are being floated. And in particular, if there is any focus, I don't know what revenue level this brings in, but there's a lot of talk about increasing the tax on private jet fuel, private planes, private jet fuel, which of course only would address the very wealthy and would address fossil fuel consumption. So I'm curious if that's one of the considerations in what I assume is a much larger list. Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. And before counselors jump in on that, and I do want them to, let's take Seth's hand, and then I'll ask some of the counselors to jump in. Thanks for that question, Betsy. Seth Manley?
Hello. So I noticed on the first set of slides there, you put up some messages that you had received during your, outreach to the citizens. And among those messages, I didn't see anything about the concern that CO2 is not a threat to the climate. Now, I'm actually politically involved, and I know at least one-third of the Vermonters in the state, probably closer to 50% of the Vermonters, do not believe that CO2 is a threat to the climate. So I'm just curious why you guys didn't include that in your messages. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Seth. Okay, great. I'm gonna let me take a quick pause, or actually, counselors, you want to just think a little bit about some of these responses. We had questions about biodiesel, questions about different funding mechanisms, and then questions about folks who don't see this as an issue. Diana, over to you, and then let's see if there's any counselor feedback we want to get.
Yeah, thank you. I had sort of the same question, which is how did carbon come to be the primary and is almost the sole uh, substance that needs mitigation, when Bill Gates even has decided it's not manageable, and he's turned to methane as a reason to mandate his product Bovaer, and which has sickened and killed a lot of cows in Denmark, but still, it was another choice. My choice would be the aerosol pollution that has changed our climate drastically in the last, I notice it most in the last 2 or 3 years. We don't see the sun anymore. We don't have access to blue skies. And I think that this is something that other states have addressed in terms of trying to report on, at least, if not rid themselves of this tyranny from the sky that no one voted for. So I wish you'd consider that as
Okay.
another element in your plan.
Thanks for the comment. Appreciate that. Counselors, if you can hang on one second, I'm going to grab Kelly's comment, and then I really am going to see if there's any reaction for some of these questions where we're hearing. Kelly Mendoza. I can't hear you, Kelly. I think others may have the same problem. I'm not quite sure what's going on. It looks like you're not muted, so it must be something with your microphone. I still can't hear you, Kelly. Why don't you mess around with some of those microphone settings and maybe you can pick up a different microphone setting. While Kelly's doing that, I am curious, counselors, we had questions about diesel, about financing and funding options, and about, how big a deal is this anyway, the CO2 versus methane versus other things. And so I'm just curious, counselors, any quick reactions to some of those questions about it? David Mears?
Yeah, a couple of, I'll just pick off a couple of them. One on the funding. What I heard among the counselors, we didn't have a conversation that was intended to drive to a specific source of revenue. In the course of our discussions, we threw out a lot of different ideas, including the one that you suggested, and there were a lot of counterpoint discussions all throughout. And ultimately, I think where we ended up as a council was deciding, frankly, it's an intensely political decision. It's also an intensely fact-specific decision. It requires that you have a full and complete knowledge of the source of state funding and resources and revenue options. So we didn't feel like we had the time, resources, or frankly, it was our position to make specific recommendations about who the winners and losers might be in the course of any kind of revenue recommendations. So you won't see that in the report, but I think that the General Assembly is the right place to take those perspectives and ideas. With regard to CO2 as a source of carbon pollution and contributor to climate change, putting aside the fact that I personally just disagree with that, this wasn't intended to be a report that represented popular opinion one way or the other. It was intended to follow where the science and the facts led us. Put that to the side. There was definitely conversation about recognizing the fact that we need to develop a plan that works for Vermonters. And we know, regardless of what your perspective is on the science of climate change, that our state is facing more intense, more frequent extreme weather events, and that we need to, create more resilience for our communities in responding to that. We know that we have, whether you think people should be buying solar and EVs and heat pumps or not, we know that they are. There are enough people investing in that we're not meeting those opportunities. Why not create a workforce that meets the needs of and demands of Vermonters? Those are examples of things that are top 10 priorities. Weatherization. Why not invest and help people save on their energy costs? Not just for the climate, but to help people stay warm and at less cost. So there's many priorities reflected in these top 10 and in overall in the plan that should meet most Vermonters where they are, regardless of what their perspective is on climate change.
Thanks, David. I saw Kelly raise your hand. Kelly, let's go over to you, and then I'll come back to Kelly Mendoza in just a second.
Thanks for clarifying which Kelly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so piggybacking a little bit on what David said, one of the biggest pieces of feedback we had from all sorts of people all over the state from the very first climate action plan was to focus more on resilience and adaptation, right? Whatever the cause, I think almost everybody agrees that the climate is getting weirder. We're getting more floods, we're getting more droughts, we're getting severe winds up here in Franklin County near the lake, um, looking at how are we going to be more resilient? How are we going to prepare for any crazy environmental things that might be happening and make sure that we are prepared. So that was something we dug into, I think, a lot more and tried to lift up a lot more in this plan as we revised it. Also, people often use CO2 or carbon as like the catch-all, but that's not at all the implication or how we've been looking at when we say climate pollution, we're talking about all kinds of different emissions, including methane and things from refrigerants and things like that that are causing damage. So it's not just CO2 that is being talked about when we talk about emissions reduction. So I
Thanks,
wanted to
Kelly.
make sure that was clear.
Yeah, that's right. And the plan talks about greenhouse gas emissions, which includes all the gases which are causing the effect of a warming in the climate. Um, Kelly Mendoza, let's see if we got your audio working. Ah, no, it's not working. How frustrating. I'm not quite sure. It just happens sometimes that it pulls on the wrong microphone, and so we can't quite hear you. It, apologies. Maybe as what I do is I try to find someone who's about, 20 years younger than I am. Maybe if there's someone in the background that can help you. Okay. So what I'd love to do, Seth, I'm not going to grab your hand out right now. I'd love to do an exercise quickly. And that is, um, there's a lot in this plan. You've heard about the 10 priority actions. There's additional actions as well. There's emphasis on how communities can be more prepared for extreme weather and other types of hazards. We have a little exercise here that we're going to do, which really tries to get at what feels most compelling for you. And my colleague Charlotte just dropped in the chat a link, and that link will take you, and you can use the little QR code with your phone if you prefer to use your phone. But it's going to ask you just one question. And if your answer is brief, it'll be better because it'll be easier to read. Just a short phrase in response. But what of these actions is most compelling to me, my organization, my constituents, of what we've been talking about so far in Vermont's Climate Action Plan? So just take a moment. I encourage everyone to click through to that link and answer that one question, a short phrase. What really is most compelling? What is interesting and exciting? Something that feels like, yeah, let's do this. Okay, let's just take a moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Charlotte, when you start to get some content, you could share your screen. Okay, I'm just going to be reading this as you all read it too. Once you finish typing something in, just look back at the screen and we can take a peek at this. Right. Weatherization, public health, reducing methane, protecting wetlands, low carbon diesel, compact development. Right. Workforce, education. It's great. It's a whole bunch of the top 10 are popping up here. More public transportation, the cap and invest, nature-based solutions, agricultural and working lands, resilience, local economies, concentrated development. Great. Right. The flooding fund, more on compact development, weatherization, small scale ag, enacting the polluters pay law. Right. Reducing emissions, climate smart commodities, crops. Okay. Interesting. Light pollution, Wouldn't have thought of that. Job creation. All right, we'll let this go for a little bit. How many do we have there, Charlotte? 40 something, 50? We'll give you a second just to finish writing. What we'll do in the summary to this meeting, we'll make a better summary of this that we can do in real time. In just a moment, I'll ask Charlotte if she's able to activate the little summarize function of Menti, which is a little cranky. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. All right, so this is let's see how AI does for us today in sorting out and summarizing. All right, so a lot around nature solutions, nature-based solutions, that came up a lot in your responses. Weatherization came up a lot, resilience, electrification, public transportation, education, compact development, workforce, ag. Great. That was just with the ones who managed to type in the first, minute or two there. I think that was a helpful summary, actually. It really speaks to the fact that many of those top 10 actions sound like they're resonating with folks or many folks on this call. Okay, great. So I want to pivot to this next sort of question of, okay, we have a climate action plan. How do we get action, right? So turning from planning to action. And I think one of the things, there's been a lot of activity in the chat. I'm a little nervous when we have so much um, uh, detailed activity in the chat. Folks aren't listening so much. So I'm just going to say maybe we'll take a quick pause on the chat for a moment. And I'm going to invite some counselors to do a little panel, plus Jane Lazorchak, who is head of the Climate Action Office in state government, which is under the Agency of Natural Resources. So if I can get my colleague Charlotte to help pin us up here, you'll see, there we go. So the two folks you haven't met yet are Jane Lazorchak, Director of the Climate Action Office. She'll say a little word about what that office is and its role in all this. And then Quincy Sabic, you haven't met yet. And Quincy is a counselor and the student representative on the council. And so what I'd love to do is just for a moment, have a conversation about action, right? And have a conversation about how the climate action plan can be a launching pad for action in different areas, in different parts of the state and in different ways of doing it. David Mears, I'm going to start with you because I like your metaphor. I had you say it. And maybe it's not a metaphor, maybe it's, well, I don't know the right word, but analogy around bread making here. And so, and we said it last week, so if you heard it already, apologies to those who heard it. But David, can you say a little bit how you see the climate action plan in this analogy of bread making?
Yeah, thanks, David. I started making sourdough bread during the pandemic, and so it's been. And then my brother got into it, and we compete for who can make the best bread. And so it just jumped to my mind as I was thinking about how to describe what the plan is and what it is not. And I think of it as the sourdough starter. It's the yeast. The plan is a collection of ideas that are intended to catalyze action. It was developed, it's a robust yeast, it's a robust starter. It was developed by a lot of experts and a lot of state leadership who were also informed by the experts that work in their agencies. So it's a rich soup of ideas, and yet it's far from being a loaf of bread. You know, to make bread, you take the yeast, you mix some flour and some salt and some water, and then you have to, let it rise. You have to bake it. You have to, you can add things to it. You can make it cheddar jalapeno bread, but you have to do all these steps. And that's the work that the Climate Council did not do. We're hoping that the broader public, that legislators, leaders in business, and then communities will take the spoonful that's most compelling to them of those ideas, and that they will add the flour, that they will work with other leaders in their community and build coalitions to knead it, to let it rise, to bake it. And that's the work that we're leaving to the broader community to do. And I'm happy to talk more about the concept, but I wanted to make sure that people understood this is not a plan that you can just, like a menu that you can just start to plug in and go forward. It's going to take some significant lifting by leadership across the state, and leadership, I mean broadly, to include people that work at the local level as well as the state and national level.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that. Quincy, I'm curious the way you look at these. You've been involved in some of the subcommittees. You're recently appointed to council a couple months ago. Like, how are you seeing the plan as helpful in the way conversations are happening that you're party to or you're seeing with youth and across the state?
Yeah, thank you. Hi guys, I'm Quincy Sapik. I'm a senior at Virgins Union High School, and I'm also the youth representative on the council. So I work with the youth representatives from the other subcommittees. There's three of us, and we're currently onboarding a fourth person. So we're really focused on engaging youth in discussions about climate change, seeing as we're the ones that will inherit the planet down the road. So our biggest focus is making the cap something that feels accessible to all different ages. So our biggest focus has been on creating a resource that can break down the cap into digestible pieces and is focused on implementation. So steps that young people can take in their own lives to promote climate activism and to work to reduce their own emissions and live a more sustainable lifestyle. So I'll put a link to it in the chat. But we've created a little page that has some resources that are accessible to youth that they're able to view on their own time. And our main purpose has just been to empower youth so they can feel like they are part of the equation and like their voices are being heard. So we hosted a youth engagement session this past spring when the other public engagement sessions happened. So we received a lot of feedback, and a lot of it was focused on the fact that to make something accessible for youth, it should be broken down into bite-sized pieces and into language that's accessible. So definitely take a look at that. And if you have any young people in your own life that you think would benefit from looking at this resource, then definitely feel free to share with them.
Thanks, Quincy. And it's super inspiring, all the work that you've been doing on this. And so I really appreciate, you investing time on the council and doing this work. You're getting some shout outs in this chat too. Joey, could you say a word about, particularly at the local level? I know you work at the local level, and sort of how the climate action plan can be helpful for communities across Vermont.
Yeah. And first, if you haven't already, I just encourage you to read the plan. It might be the sourdough starter, but you all need to know, I think we all need to know what strategies are in there, and then, your help identifying what's ripe for your community, for your home, and then showing up and speaking up. To actually turn the recommendations into reality, we need your help. We need the partnership of the governor and the legislature and, the business community and far more. So, and as David noted, that a lot of this work happens at the local level. So, making sure that you're understanding what's in the plan so that you can think about the kinds of strategies that you may be able to embrace and employ locally is really important. If, we are so lucky in Vermont to have very strong civic engagement commitment. And we have groups like town energy committees, mostly municipally appointed, conservation commissions that are focused a lot on the resilience strategies. So if you haven't seen if your town has a town energy committee or a conservation commission, I highly recommend that you look into it and see if you might join that work. Also just showing up, Chris Campany, who's another council member, is not here today, but he's a regional planner, and the work happening at our regional planning commissions and regional economic development corporations is also so important. So following the work of the regional planning commissions and those kinds of partner groups is really important. So just showing up and getting involved locally is really important, as is making sure that, the priorities that you would like to see advanced are on the radar of your legislators. I see some legislators on this call today. I'm grateful for their partnership in this work, and just making sure they know where you stand is also going to be really important because it's going to take all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Joey. Yeah, there's lots of different venues in which having a state plan can be helpful. All right, I think that's kind of the bottom line I'm hearing as well, Joey, here. Um, Jane, could you say a word about the Climate Action Office and sort of how the Climate Action Office works with the council and this plan in the work of state government?
Yes, thank you, David, and thanks everyone. Jane Lazarchek, as David mentioned, the Climate Action Office sits within the Agency of Natural Resources in the Secretary's office, but our role is much larger. We think about how we coordinate, amplify, and measure and track climate action across state government. We're supported by an interagency advisory board to the Climate Office that helps us think about how we advance solutions that lift up action across all of state government in a responsive way. We're a relatively new office. We've been in existence for just over 3 years. We were actually the outcome of state government support and response to the initial Climate Action Plan, where there was a recommendation in that plan to create an office to be supportive and coordinate that work across state government, as well as serve the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act, the law that David referenced at the beginning, which is foundational to all of this work. So with respect to that, we play a supportive role for the Climate Council and the development of the Climate Action Plan. We help pay for the great services of David and facilitation for these meetings. We help pull together all the pieces of the plan. And as a result, really use that plan in two ways. One, as an overarching guidepost for advancing climate action in state government. It's a little tricky. It's not a state climate action plan. It's written by this independent body, the Vermont Climate Council, but it's really incubated and pulling in ideas from state government. And we certainly have a critical role in moving forward many of the recommendations within it. So we use it as that overarching guidepost for climate action in the state to move the needle and meet the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And then oftentimes there are specific recommendations where state government is called out in the CAP that we can advance both in service of being responsive to the council and others, but also in response to doing the work that we do, good governance around moving climate forward. And around the second climate action plan update, there are some specific requirements and timelines with respect to some of the requirements around the recommendation of a cap and invest. And there have been specific incremental progress that we've been making around further advancing that recommendation by providing a memo to the legislature, supporting testimony, and thinking about how we move forward with the standing up of a greenhouse gas reporting program. So I leave that as sort of a kernel of an idea of a specific thing that we could discuss if folks have questions. But in large part, our role is both to work collaboratively to ensure the ship keeps moving forward and the plan and the requirements are met, and then to amplify those recommendations and think about how we can support specific agencies in moving those forward where they make sense. So I'll leave it at that and then look forward to answering any questions about the work and the role that our office plays in government.
Thanks, Jane. Really helpful. And I think, it's a big change for Vermont to have this interagency group that you all lead, looking across all state government, and trying to keep track of and be coherent in the way the state is taking these actions forward. Yeah. David Mears.
Yeah, thanks, David. There was a couple of substantive thoughts I realized I meant to make, but I got caught up in making bread.
My bad.
I think we're at a moment where what this plan is not is a top 10 list of things that you can do, to turn off the tap, recycle, turn off the lights, all good things to do. This is a plan that is making really transformational suggestions and recommendations. And if we're going to achieve these, it's going to require a different kind of engagement by the public. Vermont's greatest strength is our size, the ability to collaborate. And frankly, we don't recognize and realize that. We need more radical collaboration in this state that reaches across sectors of business, public sector, local, state, regional. There's just so many ways in which we have to begin to work together. And if we do, we'll see amazing results. The kinds of recommendations that came out of this reflected those different perspectives. I also want to give a shout out to groups like Joey's There's a number of nonprofits, groups across the state that are doing critical work that bring expertise to this, that are deserving of people's support. And so engage with them in whatever way you can, whatever resources, whether it's your time or your money or your expertise, to share that with these groups as they do this work. And then a last thought that I'll share, one of the things that a group I'm involved with, the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, is doing is trying to connect the dots between science and policy, for instance. And there are many ways in which the scientists have acted, in an independent manner. They've developed this amazing set of information that is useful to us as we make decisions, but it's not often shared in a way that's understandable. And so a specific shout out and recognition of the scientists who are informing this work, but then a request also that they collaborate more actively with the different groups that need the benefit of your knowledge and wisdom.
Thanks, David. So pretty soon I want to just switch it over and do another round with everybody on the call thinking about future pieces. But just before we do, and by the way, Quincy had to go to a class, so she had to drop off. But anything else, Joey, Jane, or David, you want to say about sort of next steps in action before we open it up for everybody? Anything else on your minds? Okay, great. So why don't we take some hands? I'm going to put my slides back up because I have two questions for you. And Charlotte, you can drop the pins except for the interpreter and myself. And so, folks, I think it's time to use your collective wisdom now on this call with these two questions, right? One question is, what's an immediate next step to move these actions forward? And what else could Vermonters do, or we as Vermonters do, to make this plan successful in its implementation? So I'd be curious if folks have thoughts on that. If you want to raise your hand. I've been a little bit nervous about the chat being off in its own little zone. But if you have questions on this particular piece, the chat's a good place for doing that. But just we have a few more minutes here to get some feedback. Robin, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I'm new to Vermont. I just took over the Cold Hollow Sculpture Park, and I'm really excited. But I've been working in the arts field, and most of the people, and most of us, if not all, 100% of us, are all pushing toward making change, making climate, resiliency, and everything else you're talking about. So it's great work. But the thing I'm saying is what could be done at public perception and what's being done on that part, and what's sort of like the marketing. You have all the science and the actions, but what about the marketing strategy, and how are people going to get buy-in to become involved? And this is government. I know you're government, but is there like budget for that? Really great, interesting, accessible marketing.
Thanks, Robin. It's a great thought. And I want to hold that for a moment because Jane's office does have a communications lead who's on the call now and could speak a little bit to the kinds of actions that the Climate Action Office is doing to talk with Vermonters across the state. Before I turn to Sophie, any other thoughts about next steps? Cheryl?
Hi, I'm from Essex Town. I have been attending the Select Planning Commission, the boards that we have in our local government, and they're currently undergoing changes in our regulations. I'm wondering, are there any models that we can offer up of how to modify regulations to become more climate informed, I guess.
Climate informed? Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. I think some of the counselors on the call might be able to speak to that about how do our regulations support the sort of wise decisions by Vermonters. Let me take one more hand, and then I'm going to try to grab some counselors and maybe someone from the Climate Action Office as well. I don't know what your actual name is, but whoever has the hand up as Salty Dog Bob, I'll go over to you. And please introduce yourself. Oh no, we have the same problem where we can't hear you. Are others having that problem too? Sometimes it's the audio is not plugged correctly into your headset, um, or the Zoom is not choosing the headset. We'll give it just a moment here. Perhaps throw something in the chat if your microphone issue is still bugging you. Well, I'll come back to you in a moment, but if it's still bugging you, perhaps throw something in the chat as an alternative.
Test one, two,
Oh
three,
wait, no,
four.
now we have you.
All
Perfect. You
right, great.
solved it.
All right, so this is Bob Atchison. I'm the Plainfield Energy Coordinator,
Mhm.
and I would like to see if we could somehow promote weatherization, whether it's Efficiency Vermont getting on the stick and doing some commercials. I don't watch television, so I don't know what's out there, but um, perhaps that's a way to promote it. Weatherization is never going to have the quote curb appeal that solar on your rooftop does, but it's still the low hanging fruit of how we can cut energy, at least in residential and housing in the state of Vermont. The other is on vehicles, in that I think we should figure out some way to um, tax, prohibit, fine people who get in their monster pickup trucks, one person going down the interstate at 80 miles an hour. This is like a 10 mile per gallon vehicle driving unsafely, and never see any police out at all on the interstate. And you get bullied around by these vehicles. I just wish that a little respect could come out of this, for the drivers to show. And perhaps if they can't do that, then the law needs to be enforced. Check.
Thanks for those thoughts, and the piece about the commercials and getting the word out is echoes of the previous comment about like how to market this, how to have a conversation about it. I'll take one more comment from Stephen Dodge, and then I'll go over to counselors.
Thanks, David. Here's something Vermont could do tomorrow. The state has jurisdiction over its own fleet, and I'm back on the biomass-based diesel kick again, even though I know it wasn't one of the 10 top recommendations. But you could do what the New York City has done, other jurisdictions have done, and mandate the use of lower carbon diesel fuel for all diesel fuel vehicles on and off road. That's something the state could do tomorrow.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, appreciate that input. So let's take a couple of these things. Counselors, have you been hearing some of this input? Like there's a question about like how is the word getting out in different ways? I also want to note that as I mentioned, in Jane Lazorchak's team is Sophie Veltrop, who's the communications manager. Sophie, if there's anything you want to say, or Jane, about the work of the Climate Action Office and engaging Vermonters, feel free to do that here too. But counselors or Jane or Sophie?
Maybe. Okay. I'm gonna Sophie and I are sitting across from each other
Oh,
in
I
this
see.
room, and with respect to audio, I'll do my best in representing Sophie's work in our office, which is an understanding and appreciation that as we were standing up the Climate Action Office, that this work is really transformative, and we're asking to a lot of Vermonters in thinking about how we decarbonize, how we build resilience, how we move a resilient Vermont forward. And so as we stood up the Climate Action Office, we thought about that work not as a moment in time when we're writing a plan, but as building an ongoing relationship with Vermonters. And so Sophie, through her work, manages both our communications materials, making them more accessible to Vermonters with very scientific work, making sure folks can understand and we can communicate what we're trying to with folks. And then we think about engagement all throughout the year. So we're thinking about how we build a relationship with Vermonters by not only doing what I think of as the bread and butter of state government public meetings, but also thinking about how we meet Vermonters where they are, showing up at events that others are hosting and bringing our message forward that aligns with theirs, and also build relationship with organizations so that we can work in building trust and relationships with their constituents in bringing information to them that aligns with their messages. And so we do that both through trusted staff in our office, Sophie, as well as having additional contractual resources to support that work into the future and long term. And again, that's not just for a moment in time when we have a plan, but that's so those relationships and trust are there that when we have a plan, people want to show up and hear about it and engage with us around co-creating those solutions.
Thanks, Jane. That's really helpful. David? Hang on, you're on mute still, David.
Thank you. I wanted to respond to a few different questions that, some in the chat and some that were just answered, but that revolve around the question of how to connect with people and get people engaged and understanding the issues. And my sense is that we have moved on well past the issue of arguing about whether human, emissions are contributing to climate change, and more about how do we respond to it. And I think the next question, and an important question, frankly, is what can we afford to do? What can we afford to do in the state of Vermont now? What can we afford to do over the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 30 years? And those are much harder decisions, and they require prioritizing and triaging. We can't do everything all at once. So what can we do now? What can we do in 10 years from now? And what can we afford to do now in terms of both impact as well as what we can afford to do? And that's where engagement with your legislators, with your elected leadership at the governor's office, with your state representatives, with your local representatives, being engaged in local conservation commissions and energy commissions, being involved in public forums like this. Thank you all for participating. There is just heavy lifting to do in terms of making those choices. And that's what I meant by the sourdough analogy or metaphor. It was the issue of taking these ideas and moving the ones that are most compelling to you forward. Those of us who show up and speak up are the ones who are going to have the biggest impact. And let's not get distracted by arguments about ideology or politics. In Vermont, climate is a real issue. The impacts are hitting our communities in a real way. At the same time, there are opportunities to invest in new systems of providing energy, of heat, transportation, and electricity that create jobs and a stronger economy. Those are the things that we need to figure out how to invest in now.
Thanks, David. Yeah. Kelly, and then I think we're getting close to finishing up for the day.
Thanks, David. Both Davids. One of the things that we talk about a lot in the Just Transition Subcommittee, which I'm a co-chair of, and David talked about that briefly on one of the earliest slides, is about how for most Vermonters, day to day, they're not necessarily going to have the time, energy, or potentially even inclination to engage directly with what we're doing as we're writing the climate action plan and all of these things. But one of the things we're hoping to do with how we've been Just Transitions as part of helping with advising on some of the public engagement efforts. And one of the things that we hope to do is help set a bit of a model for once this sourdough starter has been turned into bread, how the folks who are making it into bread can also help with the engagement and getting accessible, understandable information out to Vermonters. And it's not like every single Vermonter has to like go and do X, Y, Z, all these things. But hey, there's this new rebate. You can use it. And hopefully it should be easy to use, easy to apply to get the upgrade to your water heater or do the weatherization or any of those sorts of things. And so hoping to set the stage for and be a little bit of, not that we are the model, but do our best to show how we can do positive public engagement, meeting people where they are and making sure that whatever information we're putting out there is really accessible to everybody. So that when there are opportunities for people to take advantage of money that's out there or a program or something like that, that it's really easy and people can just jump on it without having to go through a lot of red tape or paperwork or digest some really complicated document. in order to do what they can to make their day-to-day life a little bit easier or better, or do what they think might be the right thing for our
Yeah.
climate or our environment.
Thanks, Kelly. And I thought when I hear you say that, it reminds me of some of the discussion that's happened in the council and the Just Transition Subcommittee about, climate as defined as climate is not a high priority necessarily for a lot of folks in Vermont. However, people are very interested about how to get resources when there's an extreme event, right? People are very interested in, workforce training. People are very interested in how to be more prepared, right? And those are the kinds of like the language and the issues that will allow you to reach out and have more conversations with folks. Maybe not even using the word climate, right? Okay. All right, folks. I really appreciate so many people showing up for a lunchtime webinar like this and discussion. At one point we were up at 135 or something. And so that's a really good turnout. This is a good example, though, for everyone who's been watching the chat as well. It's like, okay, how do we show up in a place where we may have different views on some fundamental things? How do we want to do that? Like, so my encouragement to all of you is to stay engaged and to recognize that you all will be able to find credible sources of information. And one credible source of information for this work is the Science and Data subcommittee of this Climate Council. And though if you read the climate plan, it provides some good referenced material on the basics here that can be helpful for folks. I appreciate everyone trying to do this in a way that feels constructive and civil. So thanks everyone for trying to do that. I'm not sure we nailed it 100% today in how we handle the chat, but we're trying to learn each time. Like, how do we have this conversation when there's a variety of views out there about what's going on and what needs to happen? All right, last thing from me today is do stay engaged. And the best way to stay engaged is through the Climate Action Office. And they have a newsletter that comes out. It's a way to understand what's happening in state government and across the state on these issues. There's a couple easy ways to get engaged. Go to that website, climatechange.vermont.gov. You can even text that number with the word join, and you can get on the newsletter. And there's a lot of information on climatechange.vermont.gov. So I appreciate everybody who wants to stay engaged going there. There's a calendar of events, for instance, there. I think that's it, folks. We're out of time today. We will be making a meeting summary from today with the comments. We will include a summary of comments in the chat. In addition to the Menti and other things like that. So thanks everyone for your input. This is a key issue for the legislative session that's starting now. This is a key issue for all these local communities that need to do work. So thanks everyone. And we'll see you in the next Zoom. Have a great day. Have a great week.